And Luke says, in order to test Jesus, who then is my neighbor? In response, Jesus told a story that didn't answer the question. And we'll see that his whole story, the very familiar parable of the Good Samaritan, does not answer the question, who is my neighbor? Jesus said a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, was beaten and robbed and left by the side of the road to die. And then two religious people, a priest and a Levite, came walking by, and they went on the other side and sort of looked the other way so they wouldn't see this poor guy who was lying in the ditch. And then, surprisingly, a Samaritan came by and helped out. And as always, it's good to remember that the Samaritans and the Jews were like feuding cousins. They shared a history, they shared a common land in the Holy Land. But the Jews considered the Samaritans to be renegades and heretics who had departed from God's law and had gone a different direction politically and spiritually. And so the Jews mistrusted and often hated Samaritans. So this is the cutting, or one of the cutting edges of Jesus' story. The Samaritan comes by, who's the least likely to help, and pays attention to the guy in the ditch, binds up his wounds, and then goes even further. He could have said, well, I've bound you up, goodbye, good luck, hope your day goes better from here. But instead, he took him with him and to an inn, made sure that he was provided for, paid for him to stay at the inn, and let them know that he would check in and make sure he was doing all right. And then Jesus said, at the end of the story, said to the lawyer, who then was a neighbor to this man? And the lawyer said, well, I guess it was the one who showed him mercy. He didn't even want to use the word Samaritan because that would get stuck in his mouth. So I said, the one who showed mercy. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise. The lawyer's question was, who is my neighbor? This question suggests that there's some limits to this. Not everybody is my neighbor. So some people are my neighbor and I should love them. But there's other people who are outside of what would be considered my neighbor, and I don't need to care about them. And it might be people of a different culture, different race, a different political party, whatever. But there's certain people that are beyond being my neighbor, and I don't need to care about them. And it seems like the Lord was wanting to know, who do I not need to care for? Jesus answered a different question, which is, how can I be a neighbor? To be a neighbor doesn't suggest limitations. It says I can be a neighbor to anyone in need of whatever background, whatever their situation, I can be a neighbor. In this, Jesus also suggested that being a neighbor means to act, to help out, but also to do this with kindness and mercy. And that's exactly what the Samaritan did to the guy on the side of the road. He acted with kindness and gentleness and mercy for this man. So I thought about this parable that we've heard many, many times. The idea of kindness, the virtue of kindness, caught my attention. Kindness is listed in the New Testament as one of the fruits of the Spirit. Paul said love, joy, peace, patience, kindness are some of the fruits of the Spirit. I think in today's world and all the conflicts that are going on, kindness is sometimes looked down on as weak. That it's better to be strong and dominant and boss people around and seek punishment for others rather than being kind and merciful. And yet, when I think about people who have been very kind, they're almost always very strong people. To be kind demands strength in order to give kindness and mercy. Look at Jesus, of course, is the best example of this. Jesus was kind and caring towards all the people he met. But you would never say that Jesus was weak or a pushover or a namby-pamby kind of guy. He was a very strong guy who would stand up to anyone. When I think about more contemporary saints, people like Martin Luther King, Bishop Desmond Tutu, our recent presiding bishop, Michael Curry, they were all people of great kindness and caring and love, and yet all very strong people who put their lives on the line for God's justice and for God's love in the world. So kindness is something that really comes out of strength, not out of weakness. The other surprising thing in the parable of the Good Samaritan is the person who was a good neighbor, the Samaritan. And as I've said, the very unexpected person who ended up showing mercy and kindness to the man in need. I've told this story before, and I can't even assign an age. I don't remember when I told it last, but it was an experience Deborah and I had that really was sort of acted out this parable of surprising help of someone being a neighbor whom we didn't expect to be a neighbor. Years ago, Deborah and I were moving from Iowa to California. And we were driving our car at the time, which was a 1970 VW bus with about 40 horsepower. And it was running in top form. And this was a pretty decrepit bus to begin with. And we were driving across the country from Iowa to California, and I had the really bright idea, let's do the scenic route on Route 50 instead of Interstate 80. And so we went through Route 50 through Utah and then into California, or into Nevada. And if you've ever been on that route, it's one of the most desolate routes in the part of Nevada. It's called the loneliest road in America. Well, it's just as lonely in Utah as it is in Nevada. We were in Utah in a place where we were about 70 miles either direction from anything. I'm not talking anything except cactus and scrub brush. And it's right there that our VW bus decided to stop. The engine just went, and there we were. And this was Deborah and me and our 3 kids who were young at that time, our dog, a bunch of plants that we were taking with us to move to California, and as much luggage as we could cram into the VW bus. So there we were on the side of the road, trying to flag down people to help us out. On Route 50 in the middle of Utah, the car comes by about every 15 minutes. I mean, this is not a busy highway. I think it was either 2 or 3 cars, and Deborah will correct me. 2 cars came by in hand signals, and they went right on by. We were waving, and then they went right through. And then the 3rd car came, and this was some young guys in a fairly new Ford Thunderbird. They were going on their way to a Grateful Dead concert in California, so they were what at the time called Deadheads. And these 3 guys, they were barely, they took this route, they told us, because they wanted to go like 100 miles an hour, to get to California in a hurry. Well, they screeched to a halt. I wasn't sure if they here to help us or to do us in or whatever, because this was the most likely route to help out. But they came and asked, what can we do to help? And it turned out they were no more mechanical than I am, which is not much. And in the old VW buses, the engine, of course, was in the rear. It had a little flap you would open to look at the engine. And so we all opened the flap, looked at the engine, scratched our heads, and said, well, we don't know what's wrong. And then after a bit, one of the guys said, why don't you try to start it? Who knows? So I started it, and lo and behold, it started to run. These three guys then followed us. Its top speed at that point was about 30 miles an hour, so it was just barely making it. So these guys drove behind us to make sure we would get to the next civilization, which I think was Ely, Nevada, about 70 miles away. And they were trying to go 100 miles an hour. They went 30 behind us for 70 miles to get to help. So it's always this, whenever I hear the parable of the Good Samaritan, I think we feel like we lived it. But the point is that the very unlikely people like the Samaritan helped us out. And not just helped us, but like the Samaritan in Jesus' parable, went the second mile, actually the 70 miles to stay with us. They could have said, well, your car's running, we're going to blast away, hope you make it. But they have stayed with us. There are organizations in the world who make it their purpose and mission to be good neighbors, to live out mercy and care for those in need. This week, we've all been thinking about and praying about the people in Texas, in the Texas Hill Country, and the disaster, and just hard to imagine what the people there are dealing with. And one of the first people or groups to be there was World Central Kitchen. And I read about this. I never heard of World Central Kitchen until this week. World Central Kitchen was started in 2010 by a cook. And I wrote down his name because otherwise I'll never remember it. It's Chef Jose Andres, who's from Spain to start with and moved to the United States, became a United States citizen. He had, back in 2010, he was a chef, and he had the kind of sense that in a disaster or a situation of great need, among other things, something that would be really helpful to people is a good hot meal. And not just any old meal, but a really delicious, good hot meal. So, not mass-produced kind of, not very appetizing food, but really good food. And so he started going to places like Haiti, and more recently to Gaza and to Ukraine. And the World Central Kitchen organization was one of the first people in Texas, in the Texas Hill Country, to be on site cooking delicious, good food for the people there and doing other things they could to be of help. Now, eating a good meal doesn't make everything perfect. It doesn't make up for the death and difficulty and suffering, but it certainly helps. And they've had this sense that going around the world to do this can really make a difference, and it has. Today, we asked you if you would like to make an offering for the people of Texas through Episcopal Relief and Development, which is another great organization that acts as a good neighbor on our behalf in the Episcopal Church for people in need around the world. And they also are working with the Diocese of West Texas and to provide help for those there. And so I'm very thankful for Episcopal Relief and Development for what they do. In our community garden, we work with the International Rescue Committee. And the International Rescue Committee is, again, like these others, is in the ministry of doing good, being neighbors for those in need, especially refugees around the world. And we've been working with them for years on our community garden, and we hope we'll find a way to continue. They've lost a lot of their funding recently, but we hope we can continue to work together. But again, I'm thankful for what they do to live out being good neighbors. It's good for us as St. George's to think, how can we be good neighbors for the community around us? How can we be good neighbors for the many people who come every week to our 12-step groups? We have 7 12-step groups who meet here every week. A lot of people come and go. How can we be good neighbors and hospitable and helpful to them? How can we continue to be good neighbors for our gardeners and as we go forward in the future. And we've been that, and we want to continue to be good neighbors for them. How can we be good neighbors for the community of Carmine, the people who live right around us? And in our Vitality Committee over the past few years, we've been thinking about and done some demographic work of, who are our neighbors? How can we reach out to them in ways that are helpful? Not to necessarily to get them to be members of St. George's, but how can we reach out in love and mercy and kindness? Today in our parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus reminds us that we are called, all of us, to be good neighbors and to pray and think about and be alert to the needs of people around us and not pass by on the other side of the street, but to really respond in love and care. As we respond to Jesus' call to be good neighbors and act with kindness, we can help make our world a more merciful and kinder place.